Broadcasting from Orchard Park, New York,
and Boca Raton, Florida,
it's the Freight 360 podcast. From freight broker sales tips to sports talk, this podcast is all about helping you grow as a freight broker. We're your hosts, Nate Cross
and Benjamin Kowalski.
Let's talk freight. Welcome back for another episode of the Freight 360 podcast. We're going to be breaking down the difference between selling as a broker versus as a motor carrier today, and maybe you're both, but we'll get into that in just a bit here. But first, if you are brand new here, make sure to check out all of our other content. Visit us on our website at freight360.net and wherever you listen to podcasts, whether it's audio only or on YouTube for the video version. Leave us a review, leave us a comment, share us with all your friends in the industry, and send us your questions on our website. And if you'd like to learn more about our training, make sure to check out the Freight Broker Basics course. It's a full-length training that Ben and I teach. It's a pre-recorded, self-paced course, all online, video, audio, text, visuals, all that, everything from how to start a brokerage, get customers, build your carrier network, and even hire the right employees when the time gets there. This episode is brought to you by Blue Book Services. Blue Book is the resource you need if you're transporting fresh produce. Their online database contains thousands of companies throughout the produce industry supply chain. You can easily search their database to generate new sales leads. Blue Book's credit ratings help you avoid companies with high credit risk, and their team can help resolve disputed loads. To learn more, go to producebluebook.com and click Join today. That's producebluebook.com. Ben, we're getting towards the end of September here. How are you today, man? And actually, I think by the time this airs, we're about a week delayed on our recordings this month. It's going to be almost October. So how's everything going in Florida?
It's wonderful. I really enjoy this time of year. Even when I lived up north, again, I'm an October baby, Halloween baby. So like Halloween was always a really big holiday next to my birthday, and just enjoy this time of year. So even though I don't get the crispy fall weather and the leaf changes, I've lived here long enough that just losing the 99% humidity that's there pretty much from July through middle of September, it's just really nice to be into fall, to be honest. Football's on.
Yep.
Excited.
No, I feel you, man. I will say it was like 45 degrees when I woke up this morning, and we don't exactly have our heat on yet. We're still like at that point where it's like 70 during the day and it gets cool at night, but our house stays insulated. So I got down to my office at 7:30 this morning, and I turned on the gas fireplace just to warm up the room a little bit so I didn't have to turn the heat on. But
dude, I love those. I mean, When I lived up north, one of my favorite things are just fireplaces. I don't know, maybe just as a boy, I don't know, maybe most are kind of the just infatuated by fire. But one of my favorite things is building a fire or just having a fire going once it starts to get a little chilly.
Yep. But hey, you did mention it's football season. So again, this episode is going to be released a week after we record it. So we don't know what's going to happen week 3 of NFL. The Bills will have just played the Washington Commanders. But hey, I'll talk about week 2 real quick. Steelers had a good win.
I don't know if I'd call it a good win. It was
they had a win.
They looked horrible.
It's a W.
It didn't look great.
It's a W. There's no picture on it's not like college football where there's rankings. It just goes by a record. And also Nick Chubb, basically his knee exploded during that game for Cleveland. Brutal. Another bad injury after Aaron Rodgers week 1. Although Aaron Rodgers says he wants to come back if he's healthy in the playoffs, if they make it. So who knows? But Pat Mahomes just signed a mega contract. Do you think it's one of those things where Joe Burrow became the highest paid quarterback, so now Mahomes wants to be the highest paid? Do you think it's
yes,
who's got
again
the bigger paycheck syndrome?
I don't know the ins and outs of it, but I just happened to rewatch the series Ballers over the past month or so. So I was literally watching some of that again. Yeah, with The Rock. And also the other series I watched right after that was Winning Time, the one about the Lakers dynasty in the 80s and Magic and Bird. And it's really more the story of how the two of them kind of saved the NBA, and it became what it is now because of the viewership wasn't there. Most of the teams were almost bankrupt kind of at the time. And that rivalry really did. But they also talk about how free agency, how it didn't exist, what happened right after. And a lot of the storyline is when they started paying players literally 10 times what they had ever made prior to that. And again, like they even kind of talk about it then that like they're always just going to keep getting bigger. And guys that do that kind of profession, right? Like that are in the spotlight. I mean, hell, if that was me, I'm absolutely going to be yelling at my agent to negotiate me a better salary than them if my numbers show it, right? Like I'm going to use that as leverage. I can't imagine it's any different than any other negotiation, right? Like,
no, you're right. You're absolutely right, man. It's crazy. The numbers that are out there now, it's wild. Hey, if you are a football fan, check out the link in our show notes. We have a Pick'em pool. It's completely free to join, where you will go through and make your picks each and every week on who's going to win. You don't have to worry about covering the spread. It'll tell you, if you're not a big football person, it'll tell you who's favored in points and who's at home and all that. You just got to pick all the games, who the winner is going to be. At the end of the season, whoever has the most points for correct guesses will get a $250 gift card. No purchase necessary, completely free. We just want to do something fun and give back to you guys for your continued listenership. It does help us out. We want to give that back to you and pay it forward. So check out the link in the show notes for the Pick'em pool. And on to some news. So if you're not subscribed to our newsletter, please do. It comes out every Tuesday and Thursday. And you get a lot of news on Tuesday, and then whatever's news since then on Thursday, we give a brief update as well as the market update. But some of the stuff we saw in the news recently, let me pull this up here. We got, so Dean Croak from DAT, we've had him on before. He's the wonderful man who sounds like he's from Australia because he's Australian. And he writes a lot of really cool articles and blogs for DAT. And he did a survey on truck drivers and found that 75% of them, while they find the work fulfilling, say they're stressed out, both physically and emotionally. And we did an episode with Dean on what it's like to be behind the steering wheel and in the driver's seat. And there's a lack of there's been a shortage of drivers, and it had a bigger impact during peak shipping about a year or 2 years ago. But we still see it now with driver turnover. But there's a lot of stress involved in it. So you can read that full article. Just check it out in the newsletter. And the other one I wanted to point out here was the Yellow. So Yellow Corporation obviously filed bankruptcy, and Old Dominion went in with a big bid, like $1.5 billion to buy all their assets. And Estes came in at like 25,000, or no, was it 25 million above it? Just like, it's a lot of money, but it's a sliver over $1.5 billion. But there's no way of knowing at this point, maybe by the time this episode comes out, but there's no way of knowing right now who's going to actually win that bid, what the judges and the courts will allow happen. But think about it. You've got all these trucks, all these terminals. I literally drove past the Yellow terminal the other day in Western New York in the Buffalo area, and I'm like, man, it's just sitting there. The dock doors are closed. You got a bunch of trucks and trailers just sitting out there in the yard, just not running. They're gonna need some maintenance done to get fired back up, but a lot of stuff just sitting out there. We'll see. Diesel's on the rise too. Anything else in news?
I saw Clorox was in the news because I think they got hacked, or there was some type of issue that was a cybersecurity or something happened. But the announcement was that like most of their products could be on inevitable delay. Everything from bleach to Hidden Valley Ranch, which I didn't know was owned underneath that same umbrella. But regardless, to me, and we were talking a bit about this, and I'm like, to me, that seems like an opportunity for any brokers that are already working with them, or to be able to get in the door with any of their companies or subsidiaries. Because when you have supply chain issues, and it's not even caused by the supply chain, like these were caused by inventory or cybersecurity or what actually caused it, to me doesn't matter as much as that means they are going to have difficulty keeping products on shelves, which means the time at which they're willing to wait to get them delivered is going to decrease, right? Hey, if you got enough product and inventory at all of your places, and when people shop there, they see them on the shelves, you get it there on the normal schedule. You pay normal negotiated rates. When you don't have enough inventory to get everybody what they need or to have back stock, now the truck's got to get there faster. Now you need expedited shipments. Now you're going to need team drivers on these things because there is an opportunity cost to every bare shelf that somebody walks past and cannot buy the Clorox product they plan to, and they buy another one, right? Not only do they maybe lose that customer just that time, but they might lose that customer maybe forever. If they find another product isn't as effective as the one they have been, maybe they don't switch back to the pricier brand. So again, like these are all reasons why I think opportunities are created for us as a freight broker to kind of, well, target, look for these things and find ways to help, right? Because that's really what we do. Like we help people and companies in these situations solve these types of issues.
Yeah, that's exactly right. The key takeaway that I have is opportunity comes from issues and disruptions in the marketplace. So even more reason to make sure you're subscribed to our newsletter because we're putting out news twice a week right in front of you guys. We're pulling from all the good sources, whether it's Blue Book, from Produce Blue Book, Lumber Blue Book, DAT blogs, Freight Waves, Transport Topics. We're taking all the good stuff, putting it right in front of you. We've got pictures, we've got graphs, we have our content, podcasts, YouTube videos, all that stuff. Check it out. All right, well, let's give a shout out to our friends at DAT and we'll get into it.
Tired of struggling to find accurate rates and the right carriers for your freight? With DAT1, you can access more than 500 million posted loads and trucks every year. That's 3 times more capacity than any other load board. Plus, their integrated freight management system makes it easy to cover loads 24/7. They have the most trusted network of carriers, brokers, and shippers in the industry. You'll get real-time rates on every lane, so you'll know exactly how much a shipment will cost before you commit to it. Plus, you get instant access to top bids from qualified carriers around the country. Take advantage of either a free month or the 10% discount, whichever one we've switched to, with a link in the show notes. Either way, you'll save money and support us over at Freight 360 by using the link in the show notes.
Yep. All right. Good stuff. So today's episode, we're going to be talking about the differences and maybe some similarities if you're selling freight services as a freight broker versus as a motor carrier, or maybe you're both. Maybe you have 2 different authorities or a dual authority. So Ben, this was your idea, and I kind of want to let you kick things off here because currently you're doing both, right?
Yes.
I mean, the company that I work for is a brokerage. We also have an asset-based company that's separate. I don't do any work on that side, but I have worked for an asset-based company in the past for a few years. But I want to kind of get your perspective on why you thought this is a good, relevant topic. Because you're in both worlds right now. What do you think?
So we've talked a lot about on the show, and we'll recap in a minute, at the differences and fundamentally how like trucking companies provide services to the market versus freight brokers, right? And what the differences are. But again, to your point, now that I've been doing this day in and day out now for months now, I'm not only seeing how much different they are, but I'm just also seeing how the questions we ask under either hat, we'll say, like for myself, right? I work for both companies, so I will make phone calls on both sides, right? But the questions not only that are asked, and this is true for everything, will really determine what answers we get back. And the more I've been doing this and the more I've worked with more asset companies as well, I've noticed lots of similarities. And I've noticed a lot of things from the shippers I speak to that really gave me a much more, detailed or different perspective on how different they are and what that really means. So why I think it's a good topic, right, is we clearly have lots of people that listen to us from both sides. I'd say probably more freight brokers, but we've got a lot of companies that probably do both. And we know we have a lot of drivers or people that are owner ops or trucking company owners that also listen to the show, right? And I think this is a really good topic to understand the differences because, one, you should be presenting your services in a way that is most effective at you being able to convey what you actually help with, where your value add is, right? And we always kind of joke that everybody just calls and says, well, we can do this and this and this, and then they just wait to see if somebody answers, right? So we'll kind of unpack this a little bit. And I'm going to start with like the differences between a trucking company and a brokerage and how they provide would seem like the same service to the market, right? Market being shippers, people that need to ship things, right? You know, everybody says it's a commodity. We're just moving things. Like, what's really the difference of an asset carrier versus a broker? And if you talk to most shippers, in fact, I would bet the overwhelming majority treat them as if they're the same. And anybody that's been a broker has been a part of this, right? Like you've looked at quotes on DAT or you've sent over some, rates on some lanes and the shipper says, well, I can get these for like 20% cheaper or even 30%. Or they're telling you they can get it cheaper than what you see the average pay rate is on DAT or the market, right? And what do you think you deal with this a lot with your agents, like, or when you worked with newer people, like where's that frustration, do you think, usually when this is happening? Is it's usually confusion, right? Like, well, how is this shipper getting?
Yes. Well, I will say, and hey, we literally we dissected where rates come from
Yes.
a few episodes ago on RateView. And if all you're doing is relying on rates from a rating tool, you don't have all of the information. And the reason a shipper is going to come back and tell you that, well, hey, I can get this covered for $200 less or 20% cheaper. They might have one owner operator or a small fleet that can run backhauls at a discounted rate. That doesn't necessarily mean they're going to cover every single one of those loads in the lane that way, but they are speaking to some truth. And those outliers and those that further out standard deviation, that's not the aggregate, that 25 to 75th percentile, those rates are not what you're going to see on RateView, and that's by intentionality. We don't want people to think that, oh, I can expect to find somebody 20% cheaper than the median. No, that's not the case. That's going to be your average, what you can expect, what you see online. But yes, back to your point, right? That's something that as an asset-based carrier, I can make a decision to backhaul myself cheaper because I made my money on my head haul.
Correct. So, and again, you really hit the nail on the head, right? Like if you're a shipper, and let's just say you've been in business for 10 years and you ship widgets, right? Well, every year you're sending out a bid, maybe every quarter, maybe twice a year, but you're going out to everybody you've worked with. You're asking them to give you the best rates. And in return, whether they're brokers or carriers, they will give you what it's worth for them to get the volume, right? So if you're a local owner op and that shipper is very close to where you live or your yard, like it's a really good chance that you're giving them probably maybe lower than market rates because you want them to just give you the freight so you don't have to worry about whether or not you're going to get a random backhaul or a front haul for that matter. Because again, the location is so desirable that over time you found that, hey, I tend to go out into the middle of the country by Wednesday. This customer needs to ship right back to my house every Thursday. It gets me home for Friday. That's a very desirable load for me. I am willing to take a bit of a discount so that I get that load every week so that I know I can be home with my family, just for an example, right? Well, in those scenarios, year in and year out, you're probably going to be on the lower end of what that company could pay for that lane. And in return, you get a very favorable lane that you get every week and you don't have to worry about. That's the trade-off, right? So the second thing that happens is lots of shippers will prefer asset carriers over brokers. And one of the main reasons for that is fundamentally, they know that if they pay a broker to get help, that broker probably needs to pay a truck and add some money on top of it.
Not margin. Probably, but definitely.
Yes. So there is a sense in anybody that is going to work at a shipper that like, if you're going to pick between the two, it's probably cheaper to go with an asset carrier. And the second reason is if you are a larger company, there's a preference for asset carriers over brokerages because they have literal assets on their balance sheet, which means that if something goes wrong with your shipment or your cargo, your widgets, right, you know they can't just shut down their company and do something else, right? Like if you've got a freight brokerage, again, the bigger ones aren't just going to shut down because things go wrong, but they still don't have hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars worth of trucks underneath that company umbrella that are assets. And the more assets you have on your company, the more likely you are to not do things that risk those things, right?
Yeah.
So again, just for like just an understanding of why the market functions out, like there's going to be a preference for those two reasons: price to go to local or carriers, and the fact that you're typically got a little bit of a safer relationship because you know that company's got lots of trucks on their balance sheet. If something goes wrong, you could sue them, and they would probably have to pay you more in that scenario than if they didn't have assets because they don't want to lose the trucks or the assets underneath the company.
So I want to say this too. So there are, we'll call it like a sandwich, right? Like you've got your bread on one side, bread on the other side, and in the middle, you've got your meat. So I'll call, like in this example I'm going to give, the broker is the meat and the asset-based companies are the sandwich, right? So on one side, your very local pickup delivery type of stuff is very well fit for an asset-based company that's domiciled in that location because they have the assets. There's not a high revenue there, and because of that, there's not enough meat on the plate or meat on the bone for profit for a broker to come in there. And likely that carrier is going to have a relationship directly with that local shipper. So there's not a lot of room there. On the other end of the bread or the sandwich is that national long haul, those big long lanes that your national thousands of asset size carriers, they're going to bid in a lot of those because there's so much volume. It's very predictable and they can position and plan out their assets where they're going to be for an entire year based off of what a customer projects for the most part. And again, they're still going to reject some of those tenders, and it's rising right now, still below 10%, but 10% on average is about a healthy market. And then there's the in-between, right? Those medium, sometimes longer, sometimes a kind of a shorter, but all that stuff in the middle there that's either unpredictable or it's a weird distance and things like that.
Yes.
Those unpredictable lanes, that's where we come in as brokers, right? Because there's tens of thousands of motor carriers out there, and the vast majority aren't those massive mega fleets. They're small. And we've gone through the stats on previous episodes and whatnot, but we're talking like less than 20 trucks. The vast majority of carriers have less than 10. A lot of them have, right? So they don't have the ability and the manpower to go out there and try to get the best pre-planned out lanes in advance. They might bid out a couple lanes here and there, but they're going to try to work that spot market just kind of based on what's paying good at the time and then try to get their trucks back home. And that's our job as brokers, to try to match them up. So I'm kind of setting the stage here for where there's benefit, because really we talked about selling as broker versus asset. Not one is better than the other. They're just different. Right?
Correct. And I would say the way I usually think about this is really time, right? If it's predictable and you're a shipper and you know these things are going to be moving on certain days in the future, like that's a far better fit for a trucking company and an asset company than a broker's in most cases, not all, right? And again, the shorter the time frame, once you get so short, all of a sudden, it doesn't work at all for a trucking company, right? So again, if I'm a shipper and I expected 5 loads a day to go out this week, but then yesterday, my largest customer says, I'm doubling my orders tomorrow and I need twice the inventory I need Thursday. Now, even if I call my trucking companies, there is no way for them to reposition 5 trucks to pick up at the same time in less than 8 to 24 hours. Like they're just not going to be able to get all their trucks to drive to where they're needed in that short amount of time.
Yep.
That is exactly where brokers offer their service that is very different than an asset company, because we can actually get them that truck faster than a trucking company can.
Yeah. And I want to add to that. So you said earlier on that a shipper is going to, by default, think asset-based is better because it's likely going to be cheaper because I don't have to pay a broker's margin. The caveat is if your go-to asset-based carrier is 200 miles away from the pickup, they have to factor in for themselves, I got to drive 200 miles to go pick this up. Mr. Customer or Mrs. Customer, they don't care how far away you are. No. They know that I'm going from A to B in this lane, and this is what it should cost. Therefore, this is where a broker can come in and say, hey, that carrier right now that you normally use, not the best option for you because they're going to have to deadhead 200 miles or take another load to get there and be delayed a day. It's not going to work out. So let me go out there and see what I can do. Yes, I've got to make my margin, but I'm going to still come back to you with a better solution that's more cost effective and going to get you your stuff on time compared to your alternative that we just talked about.
Right. And the way that's executed is if we're really good at our job, we should be able to find a carrier that meets all of their requirements, whatever they are, to the equipment, to the insurance, and all of these things that are done at procurement in a much shorter amount of time, and find the carrier that needs the load as much as the shipper needs the carrier, right? In that scenario, that is where we're able to make this work in a way that a trucking company can't, right? Yep. sets the stage, right? So what are the questions that are different between a broker and a trucking company, right? Well, shippers are so used to talking to trucking companies that I notice they will absolutely treat me when I'm talking like a broker as if I'm a trucking company. Like they will literally ask me like, well, hey, kind of where are your trucks at? I've noticed that they also, like, especially our customers at the one I work with that we've had for years, since we also have assets, they have gotten so used to communicating to our brokerage in the exact same way they would talk to a trucking company. And the reason is because most of those loads were run on our assets, right? And those questions is like, they basically kind of pigeonhole us. Like our terminals in Ohio. So in a lot of these scenarios, like the shipper will be like, well, hey, I've kind of, and I've been on the phone, and this is where some of this insight came from. And I've been on the phone with some of our customers, like, yeah, like we haven't really seen anything come through in like Ohio or Indiana lately, but we'll let you know. And I like paused for a minute because it was, to me, it struck me odd that they had said that. And I was like, well, let me ask you. I was like, are you only looking for issues, or you're only tending to need help in Ohio and Indiana? And they're like, well, no. I'm like, okay, well, let me ask you, where do you tend to have the most issues where you really could need some last minute help, right? Well, we just outlined time. And they're like, oh, well, Minnesota, we're super busy out of that facility. And most of our loads get changed like within 24 hours where we really need trucks.
But they're assuming because
they
of
never
your
even said
domicile, right?
Yes. For months that they had been talking to us, and even in years in some scenarios, like they're literally only sending us opportunities to our brokerage that aligned with where we had provided service before. And that isn't a fault of anybody on our side, really. It's more that shipper is just so used to treating brokers and truckers alike that they kind of just look at where they know those loads have been picked up. So they just don't talk about the other things and just get into that habit, right? So again, like if you're a broker, like you want to be asking very open-ended questions when you're talking to a shipper. Like, hey, let me ask you, like, where do you tend to see the most need, or where do you maybe need the most help, right? Because now you're opening this up to them to answer, well, maybe anywhere, right? And the other thing that I've found is really effective is you almost need to lead them down the path in the conversation to cue them to what you're talking about, right? And I'll give you another example, right? Like in one example, I could say, well, like, hey, yeah, let me know if you happen to have anything else out. And this is where this came from, by the way. I was on the phone with the customer and same scenario. Hey, yeah, we'll let you know what we kind of need. And I said, well, let me ask you, I was like, do you happen to have anything that we might be able to help you with in Texas? And they went, Texas? And I could hear the curiosity in the question. And I went, yeah, down in Texas. And they went, well, you guys are in Ohio, right? And I went, yeah. And they went, well, I was just like, what about Texas? I was like, oh, well, one, we have capacity down there with some of our other carriers. But in addition, some of our carriers are running front hauls from Indiana to Texas, like I think it was like 5 to 8 times that week, right? And I'm like, so we got a lot of guys that we're sending down to where you're at. I'd love to be able to find some back hauls that would work for you. We can give you a better rate because we need to get them home anyway. They're going to be going on there at least for the next 2-3 months. It's a long-term project we've got going. What do you have there? And I swear I could hear the light bulb and the change in the tone of this guy's voice where he was like, literally might as well have just said, oh, well, honestly, like I just thought you guys only really ran local within this like tri-state area. I never even thought to ask you guys when I needed help in Texas, and I need the most help there, right? And I get off that call and I'm just like, holy shit, like I opened up a whole corner of the country and basically 3 questions, 3 back and forth in this conversation that we just didn't have access to. They didn't think we could service. And that is just a breakdown in communication, right? Because as brokers, the license is you can provide trucks for anywhere they need them in the country. But yet, if you don't lead them and give them a reason to tell you where they need help, like they won't think that. Do not assume that because you're speaking to somebody and they know you're a broker, that they know you can help them wherever you are. Like that was like a huge learning lesson.
So we're going to break down some more differences between brokers and carriers. But first, a shout out to our friends over at Lean Solutions Group. Is your freight brokerage hiring? You've got to check out Lean Solutions Group, the industry leader in nearshore staffing for logistics companies with offices in South America, Mexico, and the Philippines. They offer a wide range of roles from back office operations to web development and marketing. Partner with the best. Visit www.leangroup.com to learn more. That's LEAN group.com. All right, back to you, Ben.
And I wanted to pick up too, right? Because we're talking about like right now and what I'm seeing, kind of what I'm doing. But the reality was I've seen at least a dozen of these instances when I worked at a big box brokerage, right? I worked at a brokerage that has probably one of the larger online presences, like more well-known in the country and the world for their size. And I have sat in meetings, again, at least a dozen times where I was in with a broker and I was helping Second Voice to get more business, right? Help them to try to penetrate the account. And I've been in those calls where you do like quarterly reviews where I have heard shippers, again, a dozen times say, wait a minute, you guys can help me on the West Coast too? And the broker sitting next to me is like, well, yeah, we can kind of help you wherever. And I'm like, yeah, like tell me a little bit more about your facilities on that side of the country. And what we learned in these conversations is, again, just because the lanes and the loads we were running happened to be in one little area out of these types of facilities and the same types of their category of freight, they just assumed that's where we could help them and assumed that we couldn't help them anywhere outside of that, right?
And you don't know what you don't know, right?
Yes. And the thing I want to point out is, well, a few things. One is most of the people we're doing business with, our customers, are closer to entry-level people in logistics. Our customers, I would say more than half are usually, especially at the bigger companies, are the first role that they hire into the logistics department. And you think about it, if you're going to go get a job into logistics at a larger company, your first job is you're going to be tendering loads, learning how to deal with drivers and trucks, and managing pickup and delivery appointments, right? That's how you learn the company's logistics
schedulers,
system.
Right? Someone that's assisting the traffic department. Yep.
These are not people that have typically been in these roles for 10, 5, or 15 years. Those are the directors, the managers, and the people that are over usually larger groups of these other people, right?
And what are they taught week one? Hey, Ben, he's our Ohio guy. Nate's my Tennessee guy. ABC Trucking is our outbound flatbed guy. You're right. That's exactly what they're taught.
Exactly what
it's
happens.
Just the way it's always been done until someone comes in and disrupts it.
Right. And so we are getting, again, whether you're a trucking company or a broker, you're being pigeonholed whether you know it or not because they are making assumptions. Your customer is assuming that what you have done is what you will always do, and that's the only place you can help. So what I really want to drive home, because this is probably the most important point of this whole conversation, is that like you've got to ask effective questions to broaden their perspective, to make them see that you can provide value in ways that are outside what you normally or what you have been doing, right? And I want to say the thing you don't want to do is to just list everything you can do, because now it's like, well, okay, I know you can, but then the second question is, are you good at it? And do you do this often? And are you as good there as you have been in these other areas, right?
Yeah, I think one of the things you can do is when they start to give you objections, such as, or not even objections, but they start to put those walls up like, hey, this is my Ohio guy, this is my Tennessee guy. Validate what they're saying. Because like we went back to before, there's a place and a scenario in which asset-based carriers are the proper and correct choice for a shipper, unless there's a tender rejection or a fall-off. And it's not going to be your role as a broker to try and say that, oh, I'm going to be better at this lane than this big carrier who bid it last year, because you're probably not going to be. You might be if they fall off or something wild happens. But validate like, hey, yeah, the more asset-based carriers you guys can have for these dedicated lanes, especially if they're backhauls and you're getting good rates, that's absolutely the way to go. That's not my specialty, and that's not what I'm here to do. My job and what I can help you out with is finding you access to the market when you either are not planning for it, or in some of these weird scenarios when somebody kicks back a load for you, or back a load to you because they didn't have an asset when they thought they would, right? That's where I'm going to come in and be a benefit to you. You're not coming in there asking for, dedicated lanes the first phone call or even the third phone call. You're trying to at least present to them in whatever way you want to do that, what your value add is. And our job as brokers to provide access to the market so they don't have to try to figure it out themselves.
Yes. It's time, right? We can get it faster. Whether they had a truck that canceled on them last minute, that's where we can help. If they had an extra order come in they didn't expect and it needs to get out in a certain time window, that's where we can help. And then the to your other point, right, is, but what are they thinking, right? If you put yourself in the shoes of somebody that is trained to get into this industry, they're looking at cost is one, service is two. Price tends to be the most important until something doesn't deliver, and all of a sudden service is then more important than price, right? So a great way that you can lead into this, and this works if you're a carrier or a broker, right? If I'm working on the asset side and I'm prospecting, the things I am saying are I am name dropping where we are delivering to, because that gets the person I'm talking to start their mindset to shift from their assumption of me to what it could be. Again, I know they're likely going to pigeonhole me into the lanes we've done. We'll just use, again, Indiana, for example. Like, I've only ran loads for them in the past couple of years in Indiana. The first thing I'm going to say is, hey, Jim, it was nice to meet you. Wanted to connect with you a little bit. And honestly, one of the things I want to talk about is, like, we got probably a half a dozen customers we're doing quite a bit of business with in different areas. And I wanted to see if any of them made sense. And usually they're going to be like, okay, well, tell me more. I am going to then name drop where we're delivering to that week, where our assets are, whether it's McAllen, Texas. I got some guys up into, Boise, Idaho. I've got some drivers heading down to Jacksonville, Florida, 3 heading over to Chicago, almost all of which I need to get back to the kind of Midwest. I'm just saying that because, one, it's now getting him to conceptualize and think about places outside of Indiana in the middle of the country. As I say, Texas, Chicago, and Florida, he's expanding his perception of our company and our service offering. Now that he knows we are sending people there on our assets, the next thing that clicks for him is backhauls, right? Oh, well, hey, if I got any facilities at any of those places that need to ship back to the Midwest, that's probably a way for me to get a cheaper rate to work with a company that I already know and trust. That is how I lead him and help move him down the path of getting out of the preconceived notion that I only work in this area where I always have, right? You literally have to lead them in the conversation by saying, hey, I'm sending some guys out here. I got 2 or 3 guys headed this way. Any of these ring a bell with any other locations? Because now I just expanded that. Now, if I'm a broker, I am going to frame that in a different way. And I'm going to frame it as, look, I've got some other customers that we're doing consistent volume with that I know the carriers I've been working with for a long time are all heading to these places. I don't know if any of them are fit, but I know I got to get most of them back here. And rather than me relying on load boards, I'd love to be able to give you a decent backhaul rate if we can make them work the days and times. Because now I got the guy thinking, expanded relationship. I can help in all these places. Step 1. Step 2 I'm going to cover is, I have cued him into, there might be a discount. It's like a little carrot. I can't promise it. I don't know if there will, but if you got a lane that is the opposite way on the date that I need it, and the commodities match up with the equipment I've got there, and it fits for both of us, in that perfect scenario, I can get you what you need, and it's a win-win. That gives him a reason to want to talk to me more, right? We always talk about, how do you keep a conversation going? You got to give them some reason to want to be interested to talk to you anymore. That's my little carrot, right? But from there, I'm going to transition into what you just outlined. And look, hey, to be honest, I don't know if any of these will ever actually match up on the days where you might need them and when my guys are there. But while I got you here, really where I can provide probably the most value is in, if you got any orders that are coming in unexpected, if you got some customers that tend to put their orders in very last minute, but still need them in a short time frame, that's really where I'll be able to help you the most and provide the most value. Because now I've gotten him to go through what I can do without just listing it. I've expanded it to where I can provide it. I've given him a reason to want to talk to me more. And then I finally kind of wrapped up with really what my value add is to a brokerage, and really what I'm meant to do is I meant to make him look good to his supervisors, his coworkers, and the rest of the people in the company. Because when a truck he picked can't make it there because they broke down, he can call me and sleep fine if it's the end of his day, knowing that I will get him a truck to be there at 9 a.m. when he expected the other person to be there. And he gets to save face with his metrics, his boss, and his sales team, right? And his customers, ultimately.
So let's kind of do, to wrap up the topic here, let's kind of go pros and cons in a nutshell of each side, right? So asset-based company, right? Some pros, you literally control the truck, right? The Now, as far as the broker side of that, you don't control a truck. It might be a little bit of a con because you don't get to control if that carrier falls off of a load or not. But the pro is you're not limited to just that one truck as a broker.
Yes.
You can go out there and leverage your entire network of partner carriers. The con of the asset side is you cannot do that unless you've got a brokerage as well, right? You're limited to either the equipment type, the number of vehicles you have, or the range in which you're, that spoken wheel or whatever they call it, that whole concept of, well, we're only going to go 300-mile radius outside of our domicile. That way our guys are going out and back, out and back, out and back. Asset side, right? A pro and a con could be your pricing, right? If you're in a healthy financial state, your pro can be that you can be a more competitively priced asset-based carrier because you have lower overhead, you don't have debt and carry notes on your vehicles, your stuff's well maintained, so you're not dealing with breakdowns and downtime like that. The con can be if you're not a very well-oiled machine as a motor carrier, you have added expenses for maybe high interest on your truck notes or high insurance because you've had crashes. You've got downtime from trucks going out of service due to bad DOT inspections. Fill in the blank on anything else that you could be doing wrong that ends up forcing you to either have your rates higher than the average asset-based company, or if you try to match them, your margins are thinner, right? So that's kind of it could go either way. Now, the pro as a carrier, as a broker, is that you get to play the entire pool of those carriers and find the ones that are the best fit, right? You can see who's got the safety issues and likely has a lot of out-of-service time resulting in them needing to have higher rates. So you can kind of play both sides of it. Either way, I think the big takeaway here is that there's not one is better than the other. Both have to work together and hopefully work together in an efficient way so that the entire market can be served properly and we can all offer good service and rates to our customers.
And I think that's absolutely the case, right? Because without both, the transportation industry does not function, right? So again, I always find it comical when people are like, oh, we'll just get rid of all the brokers. And I'm like, well, then you don't have a market, which means it's just shippers and it's just carriers. And what happens when they can't communicate with each other, right? The whole reason, right, of one of the other things that we do as brokers is we provide flexible labor that can be purchased on a per shipment basis to a shipper. A shipper doesn't have to hire 2 more people so that when something goes wrong last minute, those people can jump on the phone and make 50 calls to a bunch of carriers that can make it in a soon amount of time. It would be unfeasible to staff a company that way. So what we do is we go, look, we'll give you our services when needed, when you need them most. You pay us a percentage for us to execute the need you have right now. Last minute shipment, you need a truck there in 3 hours, we'll get that to you. And we'll charge you a percentage to do that in a short amount of time. So you don't have to stop what you're doing for 2.5 hours and call every truck that is within 150 miles of your pickup and try to negotiate and find that all of them can, because you're not going to be able to get them through procurement in that time anyway. A shipper is not meant to do that quickly. They're not designed that way to do that quickly. Brokers are, right? This is the value we provide back to them. And on the other side, without that happening, every truck that had a load canceled on them and they needed to get home and didn't want to drive home empty that goes to a load board or calls any broker to get back home, what would you have done if there was no load board? There was no market of loads. You're going to drive around to a bunch of warehouses and knock on the door and go, hey, I got to go back to Pittsburgh. Do you got any loads that got to go back there today? Like,
so it's funny.
You wouldn't be able to.
You bring that up, right? Like I've seen a lot of carriers chirping on load boards or on social media saying like, boycott brokers, they'll go out of business if we just stop using them type deal. And not everyone thinks that way. And what's interesting is one of the things, I'll be in DC next week at the TIA Policy Forum. And again, by the time this airs, it'll already have wrapped up earlier in the week. But one of the topics of discussion with the legislators is the rate transparency, right? Some carriers, they want the old regulation from the early 80s that says we have to disclose our rates. They want that just completely abolished. And we did a meeting with the TIA before this conference, and somebody out of curiosity brought up, well, Like, well, how come us as brokers don't have to do that, but every other kind of broker has to disclose their rate, like a mortgage broker or a real estate broker or someone in the financial space has to disclose what their percentage margin is. And I'm like, I responded. I was like, because none of them are also acting as the bank in the transaction, right? Sure, if all we were doing was connecting them, like a shipper with a truck,
we're funding
sure,
it.
we'll just tack on whatever our set percentages, but that's not all we do, right? We're funding the entire transaction because our customer might pay us in 45 days on average, but they want paid in 14 days on average. Or they might want a quick pay, or they might want a fuel advance, or they might want an advance for a lumper, right? Or they might need a backhaul and want us to go search the load boards and find them the next load for them, right? Those are all value add things that we do for carriers, not to mention we are their sales force for the most part.
Yes.
So that is why, brokers have there's a need for us in the industry. At the same time, we could not service our customers if carriers didn't exist, right? So the whole thing is we're both a necessity here. We have to all find a way to work together. Not to go off track or off topic, but it's worth noting because there's a different way that you approach a conversation with a shipper when you're an asset-based carrier versus a broker, right? We have our advantage in one area where the other doesn't, and vice versa.
Absolutely, right. And like, again, to your example, like there's so many different variables that go into the cost to do that, right? The shipper needs a service. They need a truck in a certain amount of time, right? You have factoring costs, funding, days to pay to the carrier versus when your customer will pay you. You have your tech cost, your labor cost, and also the amount of time it takes to actually execute the need for your customer, getting them that truck in that amount of time, right? Like, and your skill set to do it. Like, they're not all created equal. Not every brokerage has the same expenses or the same skill set or the same service levels. There's lots to choose from. Good, all the way to poor, I'm sure. Same with carriers, right? You did a very good job of outlining. They all have different expenses. They have different financing. They have different costs to acquire the trucks. They have different maintenance on them. They're driven differently. They have different wear and tear. They run different lanes. They do different commodities, right? Like, and they bought these equipment at different times during different rates. Like, all of these things factor into what it costs or what they need to charge as a trucking company to be profitable. Like, we don't ask every carrier to go through every line item for everything when they give us a bid. We go, what does it cost to provide the service, right? In the same way, we aren't asked to provide the same service in every instance, right? If I got to get a truck in 45 minutes to an hour and a half, that is a far different workload than if I've got 5 days to get you a truck that can pick up anywhere in 8 to 24 hours.
Yep. I got one last little story here. This goes back to difference between freight brokers and other kinds of brokers, and then I'm done. True story. This is about real estate, right? So the house I live in now, we bought it a year ago, and we talked, I was just mentioning how when you buy, if it's a real estate agent or, agent for a real estate, realtor company, they're going to disclose what their commission is, but us as freight brokers don't, right? So I mentioned how we fund the transaction as a freight brokerage, and it's not the same for other kinds of brokers. Here's another thing that we don't do, right? On the day of my closing to move into this house, my wife and I are sitting there at the office signing all the paperwork, and our real estate agent walks in. I thought he was there to congratulate us. No, he's picking up his commission check already. Could you imagine if we expected to get our commission on a load the second that we got it booked and it delivered? We're waiting, like I said, upwards of 45 days to get paid just to make that, to actually realize the profit on that. But sorry, Kevin, if you're listening to this, but thought you were there to congratulate us, not to pick up the commission check.
Point out that there are plenty of losses that brokers take when shippers don't pay their bills or pay far later than that, right? And the truck got paid, they provided the service, and we're still on the hook waiting to clear up past invoices, right? Like, again, lots of different aspects of this, but I think this is a good topic. And again, should help you start to see the different perspectives so that you can position yourself in a way to help the people you're reaching out and prospecting, right? the worst thing you could do is just call and go, hey, do you kind of have anything for me? Let me know what's coming down the road, or if you need any help in the next week or two, because you really accomplish nothing there other than like walking past somebody and kind of saying, hey, they kind of walk past you. Like that is literally getting you nowhere.
And we have, make sure you stay tuned on Tuesday for the final mile. We've got a listener question we're going to dig into about questions to ask and cold calling and someone that's been struggling with it. So stay tuned for that on our Q&A section. Anything you want to wrap up with here on asset carriers versus freight brokers?
I mean, I think we really kind of covered it. I mean, we'll do more on, I think, the topic on the questions to ask, and like I'll put some work into maybe outlining some examples and things for other people to use. I think this is a really good way for you to understand conceptually the differences, so that when you are doing either or and you work in both, or if you're on one or the other, to understand you've got to ask the questions to get the person you're speaking to, that you're selling to, that you're prospecting, to see what you do, not just by telling them what you do, right? Because that's how it resonates. When you ask a question, that person is engaged and actively listening and thinking about what you ask them. When you just tell somebody something, they're still probably thinking of 4 other things that they need to do next, why their boss yelled at them, and whatever else is on their mind, right? So questions really are the key to being an effective salesperson.
Absolutely. Well, good stuff. Any final thoughts, Ben?
Whether you believe you can or believe you can't, you're right.
And until next time, go Bills. That wraps up this episode of Freight 360. Check out the show notes for links to anything that we've referenced on this episode. And make sure to visit us online at freight360.net to see our entire library of episodes, videos, blogs, and more.
And make sure to check us out on Facebook and subscribe to our YouTube channel for daily and weekly tips and content. If you'd like your question answered on the show, fill out the Contact Us form on our site, and we'll see you next week.